So recently, we've had a few people ask us about the Chinese velveting meat tenderizing technique. So with this video, we wanted to try to break down and hopefully clarify a couple of things. First, we'll tell you what velveting is. Second, we'll teach you how you can apply that in your kitchen. And finally, maybe the real crux of this video, a borderline unhinged rant on this term velveting and why you never really see us use it. So what is velveting? Now, that's maybe a surprisingly tough question to answer because the term doesn't actually come from Chinese. It's an English-only term that can refer to a set of Chinese techniques that are used to tenderize meat for stir-fries. Because stir-fried meat in the Western style is usually a lot less tender than meat that's stir-fried in the Chinese style, and the techniques that would explain that difference seem to be referred to as velveting. But there's really a number of different things that are going on. And to show you what I mean, let's take a look at the classical case of velveting. You start by slicing meat against the grain. Slicing against the grain, much in the same way you would a steak, will improve the final tenderness. Then you marinate the thing. Now, there's a lot of different things that are going on here. Some of this stuff is just for flavor, but online, people usually highlight a couple velveting essentials. Salt, which tenderizes the meat much in the same way a brine would. Wine, which I would argue is a little more for flavor, but sure, wine can break stuff down. And also baking soda. Now, including alkalines in marinades is undeniably a pretty cool trick to tenderize tough meats. Baking soda is the go-to in most English language sources, and it works great. But 3 also common agents in China are sodium carbonate, kansui lye water, and poppane. Baking soda is the most convenient for home cooks, I think, but it does have a subtle taste to it. Some people are sensitive to that, so these two, while stronger alkalines, are a little more neutral in flavor. Poppane, meanwhile, you could kind of think of as the nuke in your how can I make this more tender arsenal. It's a common choice in restaurant settings when you really gotta beat that meat into submission. Next, you also have a couple of ingredients here whose job is to give the thing a bit of a coating: cornstarch and egg white. This coating gives the meat a bit more of a tender sensation when you're eating it, but deferring to the illustrious Kenji, it also has the benefit of giving the meat a bit of a barrier to prevent overcooking in a high heat environment. Next, the meat is then passed through oil. That is, it's given a brief shallow fry. Cooking the meat in isolation in this way cooks the meat evenly and comparatively more gently, and is, in our opinion, the key to that restaurant stir-fry texture. In English, online, sometimes people suggest that at home you can pass through water instead of passing through oil. It was a technique that was first popularized by Barbara Trump, then by Xiao Zi over at Serious Eats, and finally the illustrious Kenji. We're personally not the biggest fans of this approach, but if you love it, go for it. Either way, you can then add that pre-prep meat to stir fries, and then that is velveting. So if all you needed was a velveting guide from us, it's all here. Just follow this process and it'll work. For an example, you can see most of these elements in action in our previous introductory beef and broccoli video, which I do think gives a pretty nice actionable 101. But the key word in that sentence is most. And that's why I don't really like velveting. It just seems to be kind of a catch-all for basically every Chinese stir-fry prep technique. Because to stir-fry stuff in the Chinese style, you'll practically always want to do some of this stuff, but you don't do all of it all of the time. For example, that alkaline tenderizing technique is 100% totally optional. You'll usually reach for it when other techniques don't get you all the way there. Starch, meanwhile, is super common, but you don't use it in every stir fry, And egg white is even more optional. Because especially if you're stir frying directly, you might not want a bunch of scrambled egg whites up in your kung pao. And speaking of passing through oil, or water, I guess, that's also very optional, and it's usually a restaurant approach. Home cooks will usually either pre-stir fry their ingredient, or you can split the difference and pre-stir fry in a little extra oil, which is something that we like to do. You can also just stir fry the thing directly. Also fine. You don't need permission. And that's not even getting into regional variation. Like, off the top of my head, up in the north, a lot of chefs are really particular about not adding salt to marinades. And in the northwest, Chinese Muslims usually skip the alcohol. So then, this is a totally valid way to prep for stir fries. And so is this. And this. And all of these are going to give you more tender end results than that random American cooking blog. So then, is this velveting? Is this? No, to be fair, just because a concept's a little fuzzy doesn't mean that it can't also be useful. If it helps you get a handle on this universe of Chinese stir-fry prep, go for it. But online, I usually see people be a lot more specific about it, like that velveting is the key to a Chinese restaurant stir-fry, and then they'll highlight the alkaline or maybe the egg white, whatever. In Chinese, though, these three parts have discrete names. Cutting, self-explanatory, yanzhi, which translates pretty directly to marinate, and guoyou, which means pass through oil. Because in my eyes, the benefit of naming a cooking technique is that it can give us a mental shortcut to be able to communicate complex ideas. Like, I can tell you that my mac and cheese is a bechamel with cheddar, Velveeta, and a little hot sauce. By using the word bechamel, these steps can be condensed. But if I say velvet the meat, then I'd need to tell you how I'm velveting the meat, and then what's the point? Because the downside to naming a cooking technique is that it can also be confusing and potentially intimidating to those people that are new to the sport, as you can see by all those people online that seem to report struggling with their roux and their bechamels, but never, interestingly, their sausage gravy. By flattening this universe of stir-fry prep into one singular word, it feels like we've got all the cost here with none of the benefit. But it could help you, that's fine. If you like it, use it. And again, if you just need a guide, it's here in the description box too. So I guess you might have noticed that this is now the third video in the last few that you get the pleasure of me. So I guess I just kind of wanted to cue you in on why that is and what's going on. So we are planning to move back to China about next June, and our destination is going to be in Yunnan, specifically the city of Yuxi. For the uninitiated, it's a small city that's south of Kunming, and it just made a lot of sense for our interests. Yunnan, it's been a food fascination since forever. There's great connectivity around the Chinese Southwest and Southeast Asia, also food fascinations. Now, as to the reason why Yuxi and not Kunming, besides just kind of liking small Chinese cities, was that it was actually cheap enough for us to live the millennial dream where we could actually purchase an apartment. The catch there is that it is a newly built. So in addition to actually planning our international move this time, we also need to renovate the thing. And it just makes more sense for Steph to organize that big project as the native Chinese speaker. So she's had to bounce back and forth to Yunnan to deal with all of that. So these chatty videos are just kind of like our short-term solution. They seem to be useful enough for you guys, and there's no testing, so I can write, perform, and cut it all by myself. All I need to do is get Steph to okay the script. So expect some of this sprinkled in over the next 8 months or so. But either way, huge thank you to everybody that's supporting us on Patreon. And of course, subscribe for more Chinese cooking videos.
为伴你们的尖叫声。